From the lowest to the highest, from the furthest to the nearest, from the smallest of the smallest to the greatest of the greatest, yoga is about all of life, everything we do, all of existence. My name's James Bogue. Welcome to the Whole Life Yoga Podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about intensity. Now, these days, sometimes people have the perception that yoga is all about chillaxing and going with the flow. And this is a rather strange misperception or misapprehension, but I've got some ideas as to why that misperception has emerged. Yoga is about balance. Now, of course, from a certain perspective, as long as we are alive, then we are maintaining some remarkable balance. Some type of homeostasis is being maintained. Yoga, however, is interested in cultivating a much finer, deeper, more integrated balance. Because from a certain perspective in life, we can get used to significant imbalances. We can depend more on certain of our instrumental powers than others. We develop dependencies and compensations within our neuromuscular system and within our mental and emotional system. And yoga seeks to invite all of these different powers of our minds, our bodies, our senses, our different intelligences to all come into this glorious, dynamic equilibrium that isn't just a homeostasis that is maintaining life, but is a balance that is facilitating and fostering evolution, ongoing expansion, development, and deeper recognitions and realizations of who we really are. And that doesn't just happen when we go with the flow. Now, why do people have the perception that yoga means going with the flow or chilling? Well, I think one possible explanation is that in the world today, it would be a very rare person if I were to ask that person, would you like to have more stress in your life? I don't think many people would say yes to that. There's all sorts of demands that are placed on people these days. And there are many forces and factors that we are facing in our lives today that we haven't really had a lot of time to adapt to evolutionarily. And there are all sorts of stresses. And in a society that I would suggest is an example of a homeostasis that is not particularly optimal and not particularly healthful, we might notice in this society, for example, that there's in some parts of the world especially, there is a tremendous emphasis on always doing, always producing, always growing. And this is really rather strange, and it is a symptom, I would suggest, of a disconnection from the real intelligence of life that persists and endures, because life knows how to live, and life knows that life is a cyclical, pulsating thing of tremendous beauty. And the glorious expansion of the spring and early summer, for example, all depends on and grows from the quiet, the dark, the incubation period of the winter. Similarly, inspired creativity often comes or is facilitated by harmonizing, balancing, countering periods of quiet, of introspection, in which the various faculties that would be recruited in that creative drive have had a chance to do something else. Life is not a straight line on a graph. Now, undoubtedly, when we are overly stressed, learning to relax, learning to regulate our nervous system, learning to come back into parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system balance is tremendously helpful. And so, yoga practices that teach us to relax, that invite us into a place of quiet, into a type of personal retreat, even if we've not gone away to the mountains or to the Himalayas for some retreat, yoga practice is about teaching ourselves to treat ourselves well again and again, so we can actually foster this deeper harmony in which all parts of ourselves can flourish. and can savor and enjoy life in a more optimal and richer way. So learning to relax is important. But if we just go with the flow, what happens then? Well, I was in the Swiss capital, Bern, recently, and my hosts there were telling me, and many of the people I met who are native there or who live there told me there's this lovely thing that people do on the river Aare that flows through Bern. People get on a rubber ring, for example, and they float down the Aare in the summer sunshine, enjoying the beautiful turquoise waters. The river is wide, the going is easy in most parts, and you can float down the river with minimal effort. Lovely. There are rivers like this in many parts of the world. So in such situations, going with the flow is a really sensible major part of our modus operandi, of our way of operating in that situation. However, if we are rubber-ringing down the river and all of a sudden we come to some rocky rapids, if we just go with the flow, it could work out not so well at all. Rivers change. Water has this amazing force, and as it carves its way through the land, rivers have those places where the going is easy and it's really nice to just go with the flow. But while we're going with the flow, we really need to stay alert. We need to stay attentive. Because sometimes we will need to paddle like crazy. Sometimes we will just steer with tremendous precision. And so I would suggest that yoga is teaching us not to so much to go with the flow, but rather to get in the flow. And that takes presence, that takes awareness. If we just go with the flow, sooner or later we'll get thrown off some waterfall and plunge perhaps to an unfortunate end. Or we'll get swept off in some oxbow lake and we'll be eddying around and around, not moving on to our dearly desired destination. If we want to move through life in a way that's truly going to be nourishing for us, then never mind going with the flow, we have to get in the flow. And that is not going to happen if we just kick back and allow the inertia of our previously established habits to carry us wherever they will. Where will they carry us? They'll carry us in the same direction that they've carried us up to now. And yoga begins when we acknowledge and own where I am now is perhaps not as optimal as it could be. Yoga begins when I own that I am not in a state of yoga. When I acknowledge that sometimes I've been my own enemy. Sometimes I have got in my own way and I would like to do something about it. So just going with the flow and carrying on with the inertia of the previously established habits, that's not a sensible approach. Carrying on with the previously established habits is just going to perpetuate the self-sabotaging, less than optimal patterns that leave me feeling like life could be deeper, richer, sweeter than I am allowing it to be because of my accumulated tendencies, habits, and attitudes. I would perhaps like to refine those attitudes, to invite a subtler, finer balance, a more beautiful dynamic equilibrium, and that is what yoga is about. Now, does that require intensity? Yes, it does. But what does intensity mean in yoga? There's a beautiful Sanskrit word, Tīvra, and in the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali tells us that for the practitioner who is very Tīvra, then yoga, the goal, is so close. There is a line translated from the Quran as, God is nearer to the human being than the arteries in our neck. Similar idea. The experience of yoga is right here within us. We have the capacity within. It's so close. And yet, our experience of it is impeded by our habituation and our conditioned ideas to something less than that, to something that perpetuates the sense of fragmentation, separation, and sometimes isolation. So if we're going to change our habits, this requires a certain intensity. Now, when Patanjali tells us, for the one who's really Tīvra, the one who's really intent upon yoga, then yoga is very proximate. Yoga is right here. When he tells us this, Patanjali, the great sage who gave us the Yoga Sutra, he has already made clear what yoga practice means. And he's told us that practice is an effort, yatna in Sanskrit. It's an effort, stitau, which means for the sake of sthiti, for the sake of steadiness. So yoga practice is the effort to foster steadiness. And how is that effort? It is dirghakala, which means long-term, nirantarya, without interruption, satkara, attended to with genuine presence, asevita, and a spirit of dedication and devotion, dhrida bhumihi, then it will become well-rooted, well-grounded, so it can actually grow. So practice is a long-term, wholehearted, unbroken, dedicated effort. In other words, yoga practice is all the time. Yoga practice is everything we do. So, if we want to practice yoga with intensity, this doesn't just mean doing things to the max. This doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to meditate my head off and I'm going to do an 8-hour asana practice and a 15-hour pranayama practice, whatever it might be. No. It's not that type of intensity. It's a sustained intensity. One of my teachers relayed something that he heard from one of his great Indian masters. He says, when you can maintain awareness on the gap between the inhale and the exhale and the exhale and the inhale, between every breath, for 48 hours, without interruption, through waking, dreaming, sleeping, you have that depth of awareness, then things can actually start happening. That requires intensity. But what type of intensity? It's the intensity that is sustainable. And how can we maintain a very intense focus in a sustained way? This is the whole play of yoga, the harmonization of the seeming pairs of opposites. So yogasana, as I've mentioned in the previous episode, or a recent episode, and I'll mention in another episode soon as we expand this idea further, yoga asana, the seat of yoga, is also a description of the seat of our awareness. And the seat of yogic awareness is one that is all at once sthira, steady, and sukham, easeful. Sukham, a good space, a space in which there are agreeable vibrations, an experience of harmony. So sthira, steady on the one hand, and easeful on the other. Good space, but as a place of sustainable good vibrations. This requires alertness, but it also requires relaxation. And this is the whole trick, the whole play of yogasana. We put forth an effort. So say, for example, sometimes people encounter these yoga postures and they wonder, what's the point of doing all these fancy postures? Well, there are many, many points. There are many really valid, very sensible reasons to explore yogasana. It can teach us so much. But one of the many things that yogasana is especially brilliant at helping us attune to more deeply is this greater, subtler understanding of the play of seeming pairs of opposites. There are certain yoga asana postures in which it might be relatively difficult for different bodies to inhabit. Some postures, some of us might find very easeful. We can be steady and relaxed relatively easily. Those postures might be different for different people. Some postures that might be easy for some people might be very difficult for others. But there are certain postures. Let's say we begin practicing yogasana, and there are certain postures that we find relatively easeful. We're able to be strong and steady, and energy can flow and circulate easily within that shape that we are expressing in space. But then there come other postures where we find, if I try to balance in this posture, I feel some strain. I don't feel easeful. How am I going to bring easefulness into this place that feels strained? And there are so many ways that we can explore and play in that space. So one thing that often happens is what we learn that if I'm going to maintain steadiness and easefulness, I need to maintain an effort. If there isn't that effort to foster the steadiness isn't likely to be able to be sustained. And if I relax too much, then maybe I won't be able to maintain this posture at all. And so what happens is this play of engagement and relaxation, of application and release. And we realize I have the capacity to apply or engage different parts of my physiology, different parts of my neurology. I have the capacity to modulate or invite greater softness through my breath, or greater lift through the energetic body, to help me come to a place of greater poise, in which I can actually feel sustainable. And so I can access this sweet spot where I feel a certain type of buoyancy and groundedness, where I feel a certain type of rootedness and lightness, where I feel spaciousness and groundedness. And so this play of opposites, we're only going to be able to deepen our understanding of it when we're really attentive, when we are intent upon it. So yoga practice does require a certain intensity, but this is not the intensity of muscling through. This is the intensity of patiently, steadily, honestly recruiting all the members of the gang of our being to participate in this present moment and in this unfolding inquiry and investigation. Sometimes people think intensity requires discipline, and this has certainly got plenty of truth in it. But as my friend Ajahn Bill Wharton has relayed to me on more than one occasion, and I think it might be in one of our podcast conversations, discipline will only take you so far. Sooner or later, there will come a situation in which discipline would not be enough, and the only thing that will carry you is love. And I would suggest that this is really the master key. Habits and routines, Bill told me, are not the same as discipline. Now Bill, he was a Marine captain. And so Bill got used to certain habits, getting up at a certain time, 4 o'clock, doing certain body maintenance exercises, 100 push-ups here, for example. Being prepared for the unexpected. So, for example, carrying his wallet in a plastic cover in case you have to go through a swamp, for example. These habits became almost reflexive. And Bill told me, you see, this is not discipline. That's just habits. The real discipline is the ongoing, deepening, questioning and inquiry. And the question for Bill is, where am I in this? The question for Eric Schiffman, the contemporary American yoga teacher, is, what's the truth here really? Another way we could frame the question is, why am I doing what I am doing? This question to live by that invites us to steadily, sustainably, consistently maintain that attitude of inquiry and apprenticeship. Because, as Bill has told me more than once, the human capacity to delude ourselves is quite extraordinary. And the real discipline is to keep asking ourselves, how much am I deluding myself right now? And what can I do to clear my perspective, to help me understand more where I am really operating from? What are the tendencies, the conditionings that may be overlaying my experience and maybe influencing me in the way I'm responding more than I might care to recognize or admit? This is the real discipline. And this type of discipline, sooner or later, or sooner and later, is going to invite us into recognitions that will be somewhat uncomfortable. And this is another reason why intensity is so important. Because when that uncomfortable recognition emerges, we have to maintain the fire of discipline to keep moving in the direction that our conscience is asking of us. And this will require strength. This will require courage. This will require a certain intensity. We need to be intent upon it. Our previously long established habits that were leading us away from yoga, that were perpetuating fragmentation, partiality, delusion, those previously established habits, they have momentum, they have inertia. And they have already carved a certain type of groove that will take us in a certain type of direction. If we want to change direction, we need to be intent upon it. And so yoga practice techniques, well harnessed, are designed to facilitate that adjusting of the tiller on the ship of our being. Those micro adjustments that can actually help us come more into true rhythm and harmony with our own conscience and our own deeper longings. If you are curious about exploring more how the yoga system or the yoga method or the yoga tradition offers us practical means to do this, to work with clear and skillful intention to invite the deeper type of harmony and insight that our soul is really longing to experience and express, then I would invite you to join one of my courses. And this June, I'll be running a short, intensive, 4 2-hour sessions via Zoom on Tuesdays. UK time will be 6 to 8 p.m. All participants will get all recordings and have access to them. So it's possible to attend even if you can't come to the live session. You'll get all the material. There'll be some additional notes provided as well. And in this course, we'll be exploring what it means to practice with a genuine and sustainable intensity. So we'll be looking at the ideas of sovereignty and sadhana. Sadhana being the way of yoga practice, the way that asks us to really get clear about our intentions and maintain a direction that is actually guiding us towards greater self-sovereignty, to becoming more fully our true selves. And on this course, as well as referring especially to the Bhagavad Gita and also the Yoga Sutra, there will be a mythological focus. So there's 4 sessions, and in sessions 3 and 4, we're going to focus on 2 amazing archetypal stories. Session 3 on Hanuman, and some particular excerpts from Ramayana that are very emblematic of the path of yoga practice, the path towards sovereignty. And then we'll also look in the final session at the myth of the churning of the Milky Ocean. And we'll see the correspondence between these 2 stories, and then how they are also encoded in some of the beautiful key teachings from the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutra. So if you're interested in that, please sign up now. Hope to see you there. For now, thank you.